Hi, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Therapy for Muslims. I'm your host, Amna Khan, licensed professional counselor in New Jersey and licensed mental health counselor in New York. I'm actually here today with Imam Sohaib Sultan, chaplain of Princeton University. And Imam Sohaib has his master's in Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim Relations, and a graduate certificate in Islamic chaplaincy. He's also published 2 books, The Quran for Dummies and The Quran and Sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, selection, annotated, and explained. I'm actually kind of surprised. I did not know this, Sohaib, and I'm going to be buying this book. Sohaib, I know that I've actually known you for quite a while, and I was introduced to you through, I think one of your mentors, Dr. Ingrid Mattson, with the role of helping me when I was going through a very difficult spiritually difficult time. So I want to ask you, and if there's anything that I've missed in your bio that you could expand on, I want to ask you a little bit more about your role in pastoral care, let's start with there, actually.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amna, for having me. And I'm really excited about the launch of this series. And I think it's really important for me to say a word or two about pastoral care and what that means in the Muslim context, because I think the term might be familiar, but also unfamiliar for a lot of people. And pastoral care literally means the offering of spiritual guidance and spiritual care from an Islamic perspective. And it's an opportunity for individuals to be able to process whatever they might be going through in life with somebody who is able to listen to them and deeply respect their story, and ultimately offer wisdom from within the Islamic theological and ethical tradition and spiritual tradition as to how they might want to think about moving forward with the issues that they might be facing.
Thank you so much for giving that explanation, because you're right, some people may not know, and so it's important to clarify that. So there is a difference between therapy and pastoral care, correct?
Absolutely. Therapy is much more based in the field.
You're muted.
Whereas pastoral care is really a form of religious and spiritual caregiving, in which the pastoral caregiver has some expertise in psychology, but is really focused much more on being a friend and being a companion to a person who is in need and seeking help, and being there to listen and being there to ask the right questions, and being there to offer spiritual wisdom and guidance from the tradition.
So unfortunately, the part where you were talking about the description of therapy versus pastoral counseling, for some reason it got muted, that portion. But the part of therapy is that it's basically, and I agree with you that the mental health therapist is focusing more on the psychology aspect, and they don't necessarily, unless they have sought out, they don't have that training in spiritual guidance or to give that appropriate spiritual care, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the way you've described it is, it's so, there's like a level of comfort in there, the way you said, like somebody who deeply respects the story, who can give you wisdom, guidance. So I'm sure as a Muslim chaplain, you have seen in your work throughout the years, a lot of Muslims, I'm guessing across the age range, who have struggled with mental health issues and who have come to you for guidance. And I'm wondering how were they receptive to this idea of like mental health within Islam, or was this something that you had to explore with them? I know that's a very big question, so if you want to break it down, that's fine too.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced, generally speaking, two types of people when they come to me. One are people who are struggling with mental health issues and go to a psychologist or psychiatrist, and might receive some benefit for sure, but also feel that there's something missing. They feel that the spiritual aspect of their search and their seeking and their dilemma is not at all being addressed, or that the soul is being left out of the conversation. And they're very much in touch with the soul, and they don't understand how they can deal with their psychological um, issues or trauma or whatever it might be without the soul being addressed, without the spiritual realities being addressed. And so they find a great deal of hope and comfort when they come and seek this sort of pastoral care. But there's another group of people who come to me who, conflate their spiritual crisis, if you will, with their psychological um, uh, trauma or with their mental health issues. And sometimes it's very hard to explain to them or to convince them that, the issues that are facing them go beyond religion and spirituality. It goes into the realm of psychology and psychiatry, and that they should continue to seek solace and comfort, and answers from their religious and spiritual tradition, but that they also may very well need psychiatric or psychological care. And some people are immediately accepting of that. For other people, it's harder, and I think that part of why they find it hard is that for so long that they're told that psychologists and psychiatrists are only for people with some sort of severe mental illness, rather than with people who are struggling with day-to-day issues. So there's a lot of roadblocks to people seeking psychological care.
Do you ever come across some Muslim members who will tell you that they feel that going for psychology, for counseling, is not necessarily like it contradicts some Islamic perspective, or they don't feel like it's in line with it, so why should they go?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, there are those sort of notions, whether people articulate it or not. I mean, I think for one, people often criticize themselves for not having enough tawakkul ala Allah, like having enough trust in God, to deal with their to deal with the problems that they're facing in their lives. And it's very interesting, because for no other aspect of life does anyone have this sort of notion of trusting in God. Like, nobody sits at home and says, you know, uh, I'll make an income because I trust in God, and somehow money will just come from a tree that is planted outside my house. Or if somebody breaks an arm, they don't say tawakkul ala Allah, like I trust in God. No, they're going to go to the ER and they're going to get their arm plastered. But when it comes to challenges that people feel in their lives that are of a psychological nature, there tends to be this sense that, no, I should have enough trust in God, and if I only had more trust in God, then I would be able to deal with my issues. And either this is something that they believe themselves, or something that they're told and taught by others. And so I think that's a very real challenge there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as a therapist, whenever it comes to major theological questions, I refer clients out, and I let my Muslim client, well, even if they're not Muslim, from whichever faith they are, I refer them out, because I make it very clear from the beginning, this is not my area of expertise. And I've referred a lot of people to you over the years, friends, family, community members, clients. And I want to get back to that part, but to that part about referring and forming alliances, but going back to what you're saying about the whole tawakkul on Allah, and what does that mean for us having, you know, faith when we're struggling mentally. Are there specific examples that can be given to individuals to show them, like through prophetic history, like through our prophet's life, how this was addressed or acknowledged, you know, grief, other feelings, without it necessarily being dismissed?
Right. Right. Well, I think for one, you know, it's very important for people to understand or to have a better or more correct understanding of this very beautiful spiritual teaching of having trust in God, which is that you know, the asbab, which are the means by which we achieve our goals in life, that those are also given to us by God. And so when we say that we trust in God, it's not like some sort of, you know, sky will open up and, you know, an angel will come and touch your head and, you know, all will be good, you know, but rather the medicine that you take, or the person that you speak to, or the work that you do to earn an income, all of these things are asbab, all of these things are means, and they're all from God. And so when one seeks these things out, if one seeks them understanding that they're from God, then that is an extension of trusting in God. And if one sees these things as being independent of God, then that's where there is a spiritual and theological problem that manifests in many different other ways. And so I think that's one thing that's important to understand. And there's so many examples of this in the fact that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, himself served as, you know, a caregiver to his community, such that people whose heart and souls and lives that he molded were not people who ran away from their problems, but rather confronted their problems by seeking counsel, not only from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, but also from other, you know, Sahaba and Sahabiyat, other male and female companions of the Prophet, peace be upon them. And in addition to that, I think when it comes to the whole issue of feeling grief and feeling mental distress, this notion that people have, which is that if you trust in God, you won't feel those things, is actually disproven by the fact that there are so many verses in the Quran in which God is consoling the Prophet, who is, according to our understanding, the best of creation, not just the best of human beings, but the best of creation. And God is telling the Prophet, do not be grieved, right, over the insults, over the rejection, over the personal losses and tragedies of his life. You know, God is having to tell the Prophet Muhammad that he is not forsaken, you know, you know, and God is telling the Prophet that you know, that there were that after every hardship there's ease, right? And by extension, I think that God is then telling all of us that, you know, it's okay, it's natural, it's in fact fully human to experience the full range of emotions in one's life. One can feel depressed, one can feel sadness and grief, one can feel extreme anger, and one can feel all of these feelings and other feelings are human. And and there is a spiritual you know, response to each one of these states that the human being can find themselves in. Um, and I think one of the most beautiful examples of that is, you know, in the story of Yaqub alayhi salam, Jacob, peace and blessings be upon him, who grieved so much his feeling of separation from his son Yusuf, Joseph, peace be upon him, such that it says in the Quran that Jacob cried until his eyes became white, right? Which is like his eyes like literally became blind with sadness. And this is a prophet of God, and you know, and he fully trusted in God's plan but nonetheless, the grief of separation from Yusuf was too much for him to bear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that you gave those examples because I hear that a lot, right? I'm not supposed to be sad, and I should be grateful, and what do I have to complain about? And I explained that you can still be grateful for what you have, but you can still recognize that you're sad in order to understand, especially if it ends up impacting your relationship with God,
Mm,
right?
mhm, mhm,
Which goes back to something that you were saying about Muslims who come to you, even though they're seeing a psychologist, psychiatrist, but they're, along with that, they're recognizing that there's some spiritual void that they're having, right? That,
mm,
that
mm,
spiritual piece that needs to be addressed. And that's so important for, like, addressing that spiritual need is just so important for a person's overall wellness. That, you know, it doesn't have to be. And I think that's where, like, this disconnect comes for a lot of people because of what they've been told, or what's been said around us, that you just can't, right? Like, if you have those sad feelings, or if you're struggling, then there's something deficient in your faith.
mm,
It's very
mm.
black and white. And I'm just like, I'm thinking about, well, actually, let me ask you, when you share all of this with those who Muslim individuals who come to you asking about counseling, when you share with them the examples that you've given about the Prophet
Mm.
ﷺ and his grief and Prophet Yaqub, what's the response usually? Do you feel like it shifts their perspective?
Mm. I have found that it has. I think people are somewhat relieved to hear these stories and illustrations, of which there are so many more, and it offers them new perspective. And I think it's benefited a lot of people. Um, and so
Mhm.
I think it's good for us to lift these examples,
Right.
and to make this part of our regular discourse in religious communities and religious places of
Mhm.
teaching and preaching, that it's important for people to be able to understand, as you were saying, that there doesn't have to be a contradiction between their faith in God and feeling mental distress.
Right. Right. So, at the at the risk of being very negative, I think that's
Mm,
some of the stuff that's lacking, right? Like, it's not very prevalent in our community, right?
mm,
Like, the conversations around, um, it's okay, to have these feelings. It's important to seek care, a multifaceted approach to care, holistic, see your imam, but also see other individuals. What are your recommendations to, let's just start with, like, mosques and local community centers. What would your recommendations be to them regarding this? It's very broad, but this topic, um
mm.
on yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for one, I should say that even though I myself also sometimes feel very frustrated by the lack of progress that we have made as a community on these issues, I also understand that it's just a matter of natural evolution,
Mm,
and that every generation has to do its trailblazing work in order to help the next generation be at another place.
mhm.
And I think previous generation of Muslims were so invested in building the hardware
Yeah.
of the community,
Mhm.
the masajids and the schools and so on and so forth. And to some degree, those projects continue to be a major need and challenge. But I think increasingly our generation, if I can group ourselves together in the same generation, have a very, very important trailblazing work to do,
Right.
which is building the software, and to build the interior, and to build the heart of the Muslim community. And part and parcel of this is helping our community to more positively understand, mental health and its role in one's life. I think that masajids and other community centers should hold forums. They should hold educational activities and events. They should be part of Mental Health Awareness Week and month and things like that that happen in the general society. Those are all things that they can do. But I think in addition to that, I think the masajids, especially those that have a little bit more resources than the masajids that are struggling, should really, really think about, rather than expanding the masjid every few years, really expanding the services that are provided out of the masajids.
Yeah.
And I would love to see, for example, people like chaplains who specialize in pastoral care or in spiritual caregiving, working alongside the overly extended, overly exhausted imams of our masajids, and providing people with pastoral care out of the mosque. And in my vision of what a healthy mosque in the future would look like, is one in which there is a pastoral care team that is put together, made up of people who can be trained over a period of time, and could hopefully also include people like yourselves, Amna, who have a lot of expertise in counseling and mental health, whether from a psychological perspective or psychiatric care perspective or otherwise. And that this team be there to not only respond to the challenges that people might be having. So often at mosques, we come together when somebody dies, right? And we come together, we recite Surah Yasin, or we do some Khatam al-Quran, and we have some dua or something like that. But where's the follow-up work, right? Like who's going to continue to be in touch with the bereaved families, right?
Right.
And who is going to continue to offer that care that a year or two later, people, almost everyone forgets about, but the family is still struggling, you know. And I think that if our masajids think about offering more expanded services of this nature, rather than constantly growing and expanding their buildings, that would have a much more positive impact on Muslims in America.
Yeah, I agree with you, definitely. And going back, that description that you gave, going back to that of the pastoral team, that actually raises an important question about alliances that chaplains and therapists, Muslim therapists, need to form, right? Because it seems like they're, at times, like it's like two camps, with some straggling in the middle, but where you have some who take it on themselves, which I personally feel is ethically wrong and not what we're supposed to do, but to tell the client that, you're not doing something Islamically right, and this is haram, and, how could you do this? Not our role, right? Or they will, so one, therapist will judge them. And I don't know if it's because of their own understanding of Islam, or because they feel like they don't know anyone else that they can refer the client to. And so they feel like it's taken on, it's supposed to be on them to do it. But then you also have those therapists who, unfortunately, because of either them being unmosqued or their own histories of, bad experiences at the mosque, they don't have anyone they don't have anyone to refer these clients to, right? So it's like this weird situation, and even, like I refer a lot, like I refer people to you, because along with the fact that, I've gone to you and I found it very helpful, I also don't know a lot of other I don't know other individuals, and I'm also very aware of the fact that, you have your own community to take care of, but there are also all these other referrals coming. And I'm just thinking, like, how sustainable is this long term? But basically, the point I'm trying to make is, like, there needs to be this alliance between Muslim therapists and Muslim imams and chaplains. And what do you think would be an excellent starting point? Like, how could we get started on developing and building this alliance?
Yeah, well, for one, I completely agree with you that there needs to be a very strong, vibrant, robust alliance between imams, chaplains, mental healthcare providers. And this would benefit everyone, especially those that we seek to serve, which are people in our community. And I think that, there needs to, in my estimation, probably there needs to be some sort of project or initiative, dare I say, even organization perhaps, in which, people who provide care, who just provide care, are aligned together, and it's easy to be able to access, different types of care, and to be able to reference people out through that initiative or project or organization. But it has to be something that's organized and something that's systemic, and something that is easy to be able to access. Because I think that a lot of people who provide care are very extended in terms of their time, so it has to be something that is user friendly.
Right.
I think that there has to, part of the initiative or the project or the organization is also bringing people together, even if it's just a few times a year, or even if it's just through conference calls, just so that there's a personal rapport and trust that's built. Because I think oftentimes there's also a mistrust between chaplains and mental health care
Yeah.
providers both ways. There's these assumptions and presumptions and stereotypes on both sides that can sometimes be detrimental in, referring people out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're definitely stereotypes, and so hey, we could work on that, developing that initiative that you just mentioned, right? But in the meantime, because that's also a huge like undertaking. Yeah, I think having more opportunities of open conversations between both groups, right? And I think in settings where, dare I say, more neutral, especially for some, therapists who are Muslim mental health care providers who are unmasked, being in a place where they don't feel, judged. But I think, it's very tricky. And I think some of it is recognizing, like understanding more about the type of chaplain you want, like having a diverse, and same thing for mental health, for chaplains, having a diverse range of contacts that you could reach out to. So because for example, I'll have some Muslim clients who reach out to me and will say, are you okay with somebody who does this, it's not Islamically appropriate, or this or that, right? And if there's something that theologically that I think that I can't help them with, the dilemma is, I refer them to you because this is not a concern of mine when it comes to you, and that's why I'm like, yay. But for a lot of them, for a lot of therapists, the concern is, what if I refer them and the imam and chaplain that I'm referring them to basically yells at them, tells them you're a horrible person, this is exactly why you're suffering, and my attempt to help them basically backfires and ends up also ruining my rapport with my client, and so it's just so tricky to navigate, because it's also then you categorize people. So I think just having like probably even more open forums like you discussed, or more like opportunities to meet and greet, to see differences in opinions would be a lot more helpful. But we have, like, we're gonna have to start somewhere.
Yeah, we're gonna have to start somewhere, and I think that the issue that you raised is a very real one, which is that I think that too often there's not enough of a personal rapport, between mental health care providers and imams and Muslim chaplains. And I would venture to say that on both sides there also needs to be some support and education that can be given. Like me as a Muslim chaplain, I'm always really happy when I hear from my friends and colleagues who are mental health providers about ways and tacts in dealing with people who may be suffering with different mental health problems, because that's not my expertise of knowledge, you know. And I think
Right.
the mental health community can also benefit a great deal from hearing how spirituality and theology and things like that can be employed in helping people deal
Mhm.
with their issues.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so I think that the alliance is very important. The rapport and the trust between the communities is very important.
Mhm.
But I think there are definitely barriers. You know, I have no doubt about that fact, and I think part of it is that, you know, a lot of people who I've met who go into mental health care providing do so because they themselves have suffered. You know,
Mhm.
I think it's sometimes our suffering that leads us to want to help other people who are suffering in similar or same ways.
Right.
And a lot of and therefore a lot of people have been through the whole journey of having spoken to an imam or gone to a mosque where they've felt alienated or discouraged rather
Mhm.
than feeling empowered and encouraged and supported and
Mhm.
loved. And so I think part of what we have to do, and we can't give up on the mosques or we can't give up on any of the other Muslim organizations, because whether we like it or not, ultimately people do go there, and as long as people go there, then we have to be invested in these places, and we have to
Mhm.
work on making these places more professional, more loving, more welcoming, and less judgmental for people.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, definitely, I agree. This is all very helpful, obviously, for Muslim therapists, but I want to ask you a little bit, like some more questions, for those who are not, and I think I need to start saying Muslim mental health care providers, because there are, you know, psychiatrists and other individuals too that are important to include. But
Mhm.
I want to ask questions for, you know, Muslims who like who want to know more about, again, this connection between Islam and mental health, and one, from your assessment, do you see like the how would you, and this is such a broad question, but how would you like describe, based on your assessment, the need for mental health counseling within the Muslim community? Like, are you seeing that people are specifically requesting Muslim therapists? Are you seeing them,
Mhm.
you know, requesting, you know, for specific issues, right? That
Mhm.
they may be more ashamed to bring to someone else who isn't Muslim?
Mhm.
I don't, does that, I know that question's a little bit broad, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's so complicated. Because I think on the one hand, and this is I think one of the reasons why a lot of Muslims end up not seeking any care at all, is because of this kind of you know, double consciousness type of issue that they have. Which is, you know, on the one hand, I think a lot of Muslims feel that only a Muslim counselor, or somebody who shares their culture or shares their sentiments,
Mhm.
shares, you know, their language meaning not just English, Urdu, Arabic, but language meaning like, you know, inshallah, mashallah type of stuff, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
That only that person will be able to offer them the right type of guidance and help and care. And there's a deep mistrust often that somebody who doesn't share that worldview, or somebody who doesn't is not exposed to that culture, uh, simply despite their best intentions just won't be able to, you know, help. So there's a lack of trust that mental health care providers have the cultural competency that's
Right.
needed in order to be able to help Muslims who, of course, come from many different cultures. You know, so on the one hand, there's that, and then on the other hand, there is this great fear of you know, going to a Muslim counselor, chaplain, imam, therapist, mental health provider, because who wants to talk about their addiction to pornography or something,
Mhm.
you know, to a fellow Muslim? You know, it's like you know, you know, there's just like you know, a shame that's associated with certain
Yeah.
problems that people have, which should not be there, but are nonetheless there, and sometimes you feel even more shameful to share that with somebody who is from within your faith community. You also fear that the network is much smaller than, or the social community is much smaller than one might think. You know, and so even though might be a person you don't know, maybe they know somebody that you know, and you know, even though the professional Muslim caregiver should always begin their conversations by saying that this is a confidential conversation, nonetheless, the person who's seeking help will always have in the back of their mind, you know, what if the word gets out that I'm facing, you know, these different type of problems, you know. And that affects a person's social standing, and affects a person's marriage prospects, and so on and so forth. You know? And then going back again to one of the challenges that a lot of I've seen a lot of Muslims have when they speak to you know, people who might not be of the Muslim faith, who are trying to offer mental health care, is that there's also the burden of representation, right?
Yeah.
And the burden of representation is one in which you are loath to bring up the dirty laundry of your personal life, or the dirty laundry of your community, because you have this sense or this fear that we're already so negatively seen. Do we want to add to that narrative and that perception by telling some random, you know, non-Muslim about, you know, the not so good sides of our family life or our Muslim community or something of that nature? And so there's oftentimes that hesitation there as well, you know.
Yeah,
So
and
these are very serious problems.
I'm sorry?
I said these are very serious blocks, you know, that people have to seeking care.
Right, and it's something that's been mentioned to me, definitely the whole representation piece, which causes anxiety, you know, can cause like social anxiety, or just questions about professional competence. But, you know, going back to that first part that you said about the distrust, about whether or not they're therapists who aren't Muslim are multiculturally competent, like totally makes sense. And I think that some of this also lies on Muslim therapists, where one, we have to, I think ideally in conjunction with imams and Muslim chaplains, come up with coursework or CEUs or something for therapists who aren't Muslims to understand what it's like to work with Muslim clients, with the caveat here that, you know, obviously it's not a monolithic group, but also that we need more Muslim therapists in the field, more Muslim mental health providers, so that one, it's not where you feel like you walk into the waiting room of your Muslim mental health therapist and you're going to bump into someone you know from the community who's also seeing this Muslim mental health therapist, right? And it's just, it allows you to choose more without feeling like my options are so, you know, limited.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would love to see more mental health care providers, you know, in the Muslim community. And I think that we all have a collective responsibility to making that professional, or that profession rather, something that is seen to be of great value. You know, I think so often when people want to go into a field like social work or mental health, or even chaplaincy, you know, there's a lot of opposition within the community, you know, around that. And so I think it's important, you know, that we all be supportive of Muslims who want to do that, and you know, constantly state the need for it. But you know, at the end of the day, we are a small community, and you know, I think that the issue that you raised of educating our colleagues who are not of the Muslim faith about how to offer culturally competent counseling is going to be critical and essential, because no matter how many, you know, few Muslims join the mental health profession, it's not going to be enough, you know.
Right. Yeah, definitely agree with you. And I think there's there's a huge gap in that. We need to get started on addressing that. So in the last few minutes that we have, just if let's just say, look, we have somebody right now watching this, a Muslim person who is struggling with faith and mental health, and is just trying to, like, what are some words of comfort or guidance, general ones, because obviously I'm giving a very general example here, that you could give to them to help them with either pursuing assistance, well, actually pursuing assistance through both imam, Muslim chaplain, or a therapist, or a therapist.
Mm. Yeah, you know, there's this very beautiful tradition that's found in the Hadith tradition, in which it is said that you know, when God showed the angels how many human beings through the course of human history would inhabit the earth, the angels said to God that there are too many; they won't be able to inhabit the earth together. And God said, "Well, I have created death." And the angels responded, and he said, then therefore these human beings, they'll never be happy, because they understood that there's something about mortality and there's something about death that can be very grievous, and the experience of separation from one's loved ones. And in response to that, God says that I created hope. And you know, I think that for so many people who are struggling and suffering with mental health issues, the saddest part of it is the loss of feeling of hope.
Yeah.
You know, and feeling like there's some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. And you know, if I can say anything, it is that you know, hope is the caravan which drives us forward in the midst of hardships, in the midst of trials and tribulations and difficulties. And hope is something that is certainly found deep within ourselves, but sometimes you need a professional caregiver to help you discover that well of hope within you. And if you're listening to this, I hope that you don't feel alone and that you have to carry all the burdens of your life by yourself. And that you can get help from someone like a chaplain, but certainly also like someone from a mental health care background, whether it's a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And also to just give it a chance. You know, there's a lot of fear and anxiety in just trying these things out. But just give it a chance. You know, put aside your fears of the worst thing that could happen, because those are very, very unlikely to happen. And you know, just give it a chance and just see what it's like to talk to someone about your problems, and you know, to try to get some relief. Um, so, and ultimately, my prayers and both of our prayers and all of our prayers are with everyone who is struggling and suffering. And it is ultimately God's intervention and God's mercy that we seek.
That's so beautiful, and I'm so glad that you said the hope part, because I was going to ask you about that after, as I thought of as a follow-up, but or I wanted to include it because I think that is so important. And a lot of people sometimes forget that there is, like, Islam, like, we encourage hope and optimism, and they're not, you know, like, there's such beautiful aspects of our religion. And it's something, as a mental health provider, is something that, you know, we also believe in, which is the power of hope. That there's always hope for change, that there's always hope to get better. And yeah, it's hard work, and it's painful at times, but it doesn't mean that it won't get better. And so I think that was just so beautiful. Sohaib, thank you so much for making the time. I know we had a few bumps along the way with the scheduling, but this has been so helpful, and I have a feeling that I'm probably going to be reaching out to you again with regards to other issues, probably more about, you know, later on when we talk about other concerns about different populations in the Muslim community. But this was very informative. It was a great reminder for me too, and things that I can definitely pass on to my clients today. And I'm sure other Muslim therapists, Muslim mental providers, health providers, are benefiting from this. And also, I think those who aren't, especially by that last piece that you said, which you, as you can tell, clearly touched me, because I think it was just so beautiful and hopeful.
Inshallah. And I'm always happy to be in conversation with you, Amna, and really supportive of your work. And I hope you continue to keep on keeping on. And my prayers are always with you, and look forward to future collaborations.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone, thank you for watching our first episode of Therapy for Muslims. Once again, this was Imam Sohaib Sultan from the chaplain at Princeton University. And if you're in New Jersey, I probably should not be saying this on behalf of you, but he's awesome. Definitely attend Princeton University events. They're just absolutely amazing. So once again, take care, Sohaib. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam.